Imagine a history that has been created for years, entering the world, and the world is imposing. The controversy was so intense that those in positions of power attempted to suppress it permanently. But against all odds, it came to light, and now challenges everything the world believed to be true. Judas Iscariot, known across time as the ultimate betrayer, is painted in history as the man who sold Jesus for a handful of silver, the symbol of treachery itself. The world has accepted the truth without hesitation, without ever questioning whether the version passed down was true. A hidden gospel, lost for nearly 2,000 years, tells a different story, one that was never meant to be heard. In this forbidden text, Judas is not the traitor, but the only one Jesus truly trusted. He was not a pawn of darkness, but the sole disciple strong enough to hear the unfiltered truth. The other disciples, worshipped as saints and teachers, were blind followers of a false god, a god that was not who he claimed to be. This secret gospel, condemned and outlawed, speaks of a terrifying revelation, one that turns everything upside down. Jesus, the divine messenger, knew a truth so dangerous that it could shatter the foundation of faith itself. The God worshipped by millions, the God who created the world and demanded loyalty, was not the true God. He was something else, something far more sinister. This was not a mistake, nor a misinterpretation of Scripture. Jesus himself, in this forbidden gospel, describes the disciples' God as a being of chaos, a deceiver who imprisoned humanity in a false reality. The world was not crafted by the hands of a loving creator, but by a ruler of darkness, a force that thrived on ignorance and worship. The true God, unknown and hidden, existed beyond this deception, beyond the walls of the material world. Judas, seen as a villain by the world, was the only one Jesus entrusted with this secret. Unlike the others, he understood what was happening. He was chosen, not to betray, but to fulfill a purpose beyond human comprehension. His name was condemned, not because he was weak, but because he was the key to exposing a truth that was never meant to be known. For a purpose, the Church buried this gospel, considered the most blasphemous text in history. The Church, desperate to maintain control, declared it heresy, burned its teachings, and silenced anyone who dared to believe it. For centuries it was assumed lost forever, a relic swallowed by time. Back in 1970, there was no heart in the desert of Egypt, so we had to discover it. In order to read the ancient code, it is written in 2 years, finally in the light. Entre suas páginas frágeis estavam as palavras de Judas, preservadas contra todas as chances. Apesar de ter sido roubado, perdido e quase destruído, a verdade encontrou jeito de sobreviver. After decades of secrecy and struggle, the ancient manuscript was finally translated, and for the first time in history, the world was able to see what the Church had fought so hard to erase. The forbidden gospel had returned, bringing with it a revelation too shocking to ignore. The God of the Bible was not the supreme creator. He was an impostor, a force that fed on devotion and fear. The disciples, praised as holy men, were servants of a false light, leading generations into worship without ever realizing the deception. And Jesus, far from being their Savior in the way they believed, was sent to expose the lie, to free those who were willing to see. This knowledge was never meant to survive. The intention was for it to vanish, to fade into oblivion, ensuring that the centuries-old narrative remained unquestioned. Yet here it stands, uncovered, defying time, whispering its forbidden truth to those willing to listen. We have unearthed what we once buried. The secret has been revealed. Remember to join our community by subscribing to this channel. The Gospel of Judas introduces a radical notion. The God people worship is not the true divine being, but a deceptive force. This being, sometimes referred to as Saklas or Yaldabaoth in other ancient texts, is portrayed as an impostor who created the material world and trapped humanity within it. Unlike the loving God described in traditional Christian teachings, this entity is depicted as a ruler of darkness, feeding off blind devotion. Instead of offering salvation, this false god ensures that people remain dependent on him, worshiping out of fear rather than enlightenment. The world under his control is not a place of divine perfection, but a prison of illusions, a creation meant to keep souls from discovering their true nature. This belief aligns with an ancient movement known as Gnosticism, which viewed the physical world as a flawed creation, ruled by an arrogant deity who demanded obedience. According to this perspective, salvation does not come from faith in a church or religious institution, but from inner knowledge, an awakening that allows one to see beyond the deception. In this secret gospel, Jesus does not come to confirm the teachings of the disciples. Instead, he exposes their blindness and reveals that they are unknowingly worshiping an impostor. Unlike the God they serve, Jesus originates from a higher realm, an existence beyond the material world where the true divine power resides. His mission is not to establish a new religion, but to liberate those who are ready to see beyond the illusion. Rather than demanding worship, he offers knowledge, secret teachings that can free the soul from the false god's control. However, only one disciple is able to grasp this revelation: Judas Iscariot. Unlike the others, Judas does not blindly follow. He questions, he seeks understanding, and because of this, Jesus trusts him with the greatest secret of all. Jesus chooses Judas not to betray, but to fulfill a higher purpose, to assist Jesus in escaping the physical world and returning to the true divine realm. This interpretation turns traditional Christian doctrine on its head. The crucifixion, often seen as the ultimate betrayal, takes on a completely different meaning. Instead of an act of treachery, it becomes a necessary step in breaking free from the false god's grasp. By the 2nd century, religious leaders were working to establish a unified doctrine, one that reinforced their authority and eliminated conflicting interpretations. The Gospel of Judas directly threatened the foundation of that authority. If the 12 disciples were deceived, as the text suggests, then the religious leaders who based their power on them had no legitimate claim to divine truth. If God, as most people knew him, was actually a false ruler, then the church's entire structure was built on a lie. To maintain control, early Christian leaders labeled such teachings as heretical, forbidding them from being read, copied, or shared. Over time, these alternative scriptures disappeared, with only brief condemnations surviving in writings from church fathers. The Gospel of Judas was one of the many texts that vanished, assumed to be lost forever. However, history has a way of revealing hidden truths. When this forbidden gospel resurfaced after nearly 2 millennia, it reignited one of the greatest theological controversies in history. Unlike the other disciples who blindly served this false deity, Judas is given a different path. In the Gospel of Judas, Jesus reveals to him that the being worshipped by the 12 apostles is not the true God, but an enslaver of souls. Unlike the others, Judas does not recoil in disbelief. He listens, understands, and ultimately plays a critical role in breaking the chains of this deception. Jesus does not scold or condemn him. Instead, he entrusts Judas with knowledge so powerful that it could dismantle the very foundation of the world's faith. This knowledge is not meant for the weak-willed or the fearful. It is meant for those strong enough to see beyond the veil of lies that has been woven around humanity for centuries. One of the most unsettling aspects of the Gospel of Judas is how it describes the disciples. While traditional Christian teachings portray them as devoted followers of Jesus, spreading his divine message, this text presents them as misguided, manipulated by the false god they serve. According to this secret gospel, the 12 disciples unknowingly worship a force that feeds off their devotion. They believe they are doing the divine will, but they are spreading the influence of their enslaver. Their rituals, prayers, and sacrifices are not acts of holiness, but offerings to a power that thrives on human ignorance. Judas's role in Christian history has always been defined by one word: betrayal. He is seen as the disciple who abandoned Jesus, selling his master's life for silver. But the gospel challenges this version of events. Rather than an act of treachery, Judas's actions become a necessary step in a far greater plan. By handing Jesus over to his fate, he does not condemn him. He helps him escape. The crucifixion is not a tragedy, but a liberation, an event that allows Jesus to leave the material world, breaking free from the prison constructed by the false god. This interpretation turns Judas from the ultimate villain into the one disciple who understood the truth. His role was never that of a betrayer, but of a liberator, the only one who had the courage to follow through with what needed to be done. By the 2nd century, Christianity was evolving from a loosely connected spiritual movement into an organized institution. Leaders emerged who claimed to hold the only true interpretation of Jesus' teachings. Their influence grew, and with it, the need to eliminate any alternative perspectives that threatened their version of faith. The Gospel of Judas directly undermined this growing power. If Judas was the only disciple who truly understood Jesus, then the church's claim to authority, built on the apostles' teachings, collapsed. If the God worshipped by the apostles was actually a false ruler, then the very foundation of Christian doctrine was a lie. Such revelations could not be allowed to spread. To maintain control, early church leaders condemned alternative gospels, branding them as dangerous heresies. The Gospel of Judas, along with many other writings that presented different interpretations of Christianity, was declared blasphemous. Instead of encouraging discussion, the church silenced opposition, destroyed texts, and labeled their authors as enemies of God. Religious institutions throughout history have been deeply entwined with political power. Kings, emperors, and rulers often used religion to justify their rule, claiming divine authority over their people. By aligning with the church, political leaders gained the ability to dictate morality, law, and even control over life and death. Acceptance of this gospel would have disrupted the power structure the early church was constructing. Those who relied on controlling faith to maintain influence found the idea of achieving spiritual enlightenment without the church's guidance too dangerous. Are you enjoying the story? Support our channel by clicking the subscribe button. By erasing conflicting teachings, the church consolidated its grip on society, ensuring that only one version of Christianity survived. Those who questioned this authority faced severe consequences: exile, persecution, or worse. The most powerful institutions have always feared one thing: people thinking for themselves. The gospel presents a radical idea that true knowledge does not come from blindly following religious leaders, but from discovering a deeper truth within. This idea directly threatened those in power, who needed people to remain dependent on their teachings, their rituals, and their approval. This approach is not exclusive to religion. Throughout history, governments, empires, and ruling classes have used similar tactics to suppress dissent. The more people accept an idea without questioning it, the easier they are to control. Those in power often use faith as a tool, shaping religious teachings to serve their own interests. The Gospel suggests that the 12 disciples were not enlightened leaders but followers of a false god, unknowingly leading generations into spiritual blindness. A long time ago, people had many different ideas about who Jesus was and what he taught. His followers wrote different books about his life, but they didn't all agree on the details. Some of these books describe Jesus as most people know him today, while others, like the Gospel of Judas, told a completely different story. For nearly 300 years after Jesus' death, Christianity was not one single, organized religion. Different groups had their own beliefs, their own stories, and their own versions of Jesus' teachings. Some Christians believed Jesus was the Son of God, while others thought he was just a wise teacher. Some believed in one all-powerful God, while others thought there were different divine beings. The church had no central authority, no clear rules, and no one agreed on which books were the right ones to follow. Then came a major turning point, the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. This was a huge meeting where powerful church leaders gathered to decide what Christianity should officially believe. At the time, the Roman Emperor Constantine ruled a vast empire, and he saw that Christian groups were arguing over their beliefs. He wanted one united version of Christianity, a version that could help unify his empire instead of dividing it. So, at the Council of Nicaea, church leaders had to make big decisions. One of the most important things they did was decide which books would be included in the Bible. At the time, there were many different writings about Jesus, some familiar like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and others much more mysterious, like the Gospel of Judas, the Gospel of Thomas, and the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. The church leaders at Nicaea chose only 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, because they told a version of Jesus' life that fit with what the church wanted people to believe. These books presented Jesus as the Son of God, performing miracles, dying for humanity's sins, and rising from the dead. But what about the other Gospels? Many of these books had very different ideas. The Gospel of Judas, for example, suggested that Jesus revealed secret knowledge to Judas, and that the God most people worship might not be the true God at all. The Gospel of Thomas didn't focus on Jesus' death and resurrection, but instead described his wisdom as a way to find enlightenment within yourself. Some texts even described Jesus teaching things that sounded closer to mystical philosophy than mainstream religion. The church excluded these books from the Bible because they did not align with their official version of Christianity. Over time, they were not just ignored, they were labeled as heretical, false, or dangerous. Many copies of these forbidden Gospels were destroyed, and the church worked hard to erase them from history. Beyond mainstream religious teachings, some esoteric traditions and secret societies have viewed Judas in a completely different light. To them, he was not a traitor at all, but an initiate, a person who understood the hidden wisdom of Jesus and helped him achieve his divine mission. In these traditions, Judas is seen as a figure of deep knowledge and sacrifice, someone who was entrusted with the most difficult task of all, ensuring that Jesus completed his journey. Instead of being deceived by Satan, as many traditional interpretations claim, Judas was the only disciple who truly grasped the higher spiritual truth. Some occult traditions believe that Jesus' crucifixion was not simply an execution, but a ritual of transformation. According to this view, Judas's actions were necessary for Jesus to transcend the physical world and return to his divine origin. His betrayal was not an act of treachery, but an essential step in a sacred process, one that most people could not understand. This perspective aligns with certain Gnostic beliefs, which see the material world as a trap ruled by a false god who wants to keep souls from awakening to their true nature. In this context, Jesus' mission was to reveal secret knowledge that would allow people to break free from the illusions of this world. Judas, being the closest to Jesus in understanding, had to play the painful role of helping him escape. Some secret societies, such as certain branches of Freemasonry, Rosicrucianism, and other mystical groups, have been rumored to explore these alternative interpretations of Judas. They see him as a truth-teller who had the courage to do what was necessary, even if it meant eternal hatred. This esoteric perspective offers a completely different vision of Judas, not as a man who failed, but as a man who succeeded in fulfilling a secret and sacred duty. In the eyes of those who embrace this interpretation, Judas is not a symbol of sin, but of wisdom, initiation, and the painful choices that must sometimes be made for the sake of enlightenment. The story of Judas Iscariot has been told the same way for centuries. He was the betrayer, the disciple who turned against Jesus for a handful of silver. But beneath the surface of that familiar tale lies something far more complex, something that has been hidden, suppressed, and deliberately erased from history. The Gospel of Judas presents an entirely different perspective, one that turns everything upside down. It challenges the idea of an all-loving God and forces us to reconsider the forces at play in religious history. It introduces the possibility that the true message of Jesus was not one of obedience, but of enlightenment, a call to break free from the illusions of the material world and recognize the divinity within. If you're enjoying this story, consider clicking Super Thanks. Your support helps keep these hidden truths alive and ensures that more people can discover the secrets they were never meant to know. This gospel was not lost by accident. Those in power buried it because it presented ideas too dangerous. If humanity had embraced the belief that salvation comes not from worshiping an external God, but from discovering inner knowledge, the foundations of religious authority would have crumbled. The Council of Nicaea shaped Christianity into what we know today, choosing which books would define the faith and which would be cast aside. But history is not as simple as it seems. The lost Gospels, including the Gospel of Judas, reveal that early Christianity was filled with conflicting ideas, each one offering a different path to understanding Jesus and his message. This raises an even greater question. How much of what we believe today is based on truth, and how much is based on control? If Judas, the one disciple who truly understood, was not the enemy, then what other distorted truths exist? How many other hidden truths are waiting to be uncovered? The world has long accepted a version of history that was carefully curated by those in power. But now, with the rediscovery of lost texts, we have a chance to look beyond what we were taught and seek the truth for ourselves. These ancient writings whisper of a reality that defies tradition, urging us to awaken, question, and see beyond the veiled deception. The past has been rewritten countless times, but the truth has a way of rising again. The Gospel of Judas was never meant to survive, yet it endures. Its message, long buried, now challenges the modern world to reconsider what we think we know. Thanks for watching. Join our community by subscribing to this channel. Until the next video.